is an author, a speaker. She did a TED Talk, and I found out a cool, well, what I think is cool thing about her. She travels with a hula hoop everywhere she goes. She takes it all over the world, except for to Lisbon. She didn't bring it here. We were hoping she would hoop for us, but alas, no. But please welcome Marianne Cantwell to the stage.
Hey everyone, just a little side note before I start. As I was coming back from our lovely long lunch, I was just thinking, I've been meeting people over the last few days, and you know when you normally meet people when you're traveling and you've just got to a new place, and the first question is, so where are you from? Does anyone else struggle to answer that? Yeah? Well, I just thought it was so nice being here and not having to go through that whole explanation, right? Of going, well, you know, I'm not an expat, but, you know, I'm not just here on holiday. And anyway, the reason I mention it is we nomads, we're kind of not exactly one thing, are we? You know, we don't really fit into a defined box around our location or our lifestyle. And as I was walking back from lunch, I was thinking, it's funny, that's not a million miles from the reason that Marcus and Feely asked me here to talk to you guys today. But before I get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you like anything I say here today and you want to share it on social, please let me in on the action. I get really curious. I like to see these things. So Free Range Humans on Twitter, Free Range Marianne on Instagram. Please hashtag DNX as you do it, and Marcus and Feely will be eternally grateful to you. By the way, if you're doing a bit of social stalking while you're there, please feel free to enjoy my total lack of social media strategy. Unless posting goats on Instagram stories is a social media strategy, in which case, doing it great. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here today because I've given, you know, different talks around the hidden power of not quite fitting in on different stages recently, from the TED stage to different business entrepreneurship things in companies. And the thing that I haven't mentioned before is that most of what I talk about was actually originally inspired by my experiences as a digital nomad. And in a large way, this topic really developed for the online business and nomad community. And so it feels like coming home to be able to talk about this with you here today. So I really hope that you see a bit of yourself and find something useful in at least one thing that I say here today. Because this talk is for those of us who are good at looking like we fit in the different worlds we move in. So be that your industry or your social group or different interests you have or just the stage that you stand on. It's like from the outside, it looks like you fit, but on the inside, secretly, a little piece of you never feels you 100% fit into any of them. Now, if you've ever had an inkling of feeling that way, you're not alone. I mean, I've felt the same, so there are definitely going to be two of us. And aside from traveling the world nomad style, I've spent the last sort of 8 years helping thousands of people get paid and grow their businesses without compromising who they are. And in doing that, I discovered a couple of things that really surprised me about being this way. You see, for me, not quite fitting into any one identity started from, well, the moment I could talk. See, I was born in Australia, but my father is English, and my mum, well, she was from this little island of Mauritius, which basically meant I grew up speaking English and French with this really weird accent that didn't really fit anywhere in the world, yeah, especially not the small town of Australia where I grew up. But it wasn't until I was 16 years old that I really started thinking about this. You see, being a lifelong nerd, at 16, I was at the top of my class, along with this other boy. And one day, our teacher took me aside and said to me, Marianne, you and I have something in common. We're both generalists. At which point I thought, great, that sounds like a nice word. Then he continued, "Now, the other boy," he said, "he's different from us. He is a specialist. And the one thing I've learned is that the world rewards specialists, not generalists. That's why he's going to do really well." Right? I mean, hearing these words, 16-year-old me just thought, well, he's right. Yeah, my teacher must be right. If I want to fit and really thrive, like as an adult, I'm going to have to focus on one thing. Make it my mission to really fit cleanly into one identity. Leave old messy me behind. And that's basically what I did. I went to university, I graduated top of my class, I moved across the world to London, started to rise in the work world as you do. And I mean, fitting in, it kind of worked. Like, on the outside, I mean, I was alright at playing the parts. Well, you know, on a good day anyway. But on the inside, to be honest, I was stuck, feeling like smaller and smaller, and by that point, I was Googling for better options, like every night. But all the advice that I found was just the usual cliches, like find your one big passion, or find your tribe. But like, guys, seriously? What do you do when you've never seen a place that you completely fit? You know, not just another one where you kind of look like you do. And so, a decade ago, I decided to take this seriously. And I asked myself if it was possible to create a career where you don't have to fit yourself into a box. And then I quit my job to make that happen as my own boss. Since then, I've traveled the world, nomad style, living everywhere, like places like Bali and Costa Rica, or I love cities as well, so New York and London. And while there, I've run these global online festivals where brilliant thinkers share how they handle these questions for themselves. But most of all, I've been privileged to poke around inside the heads of thousands of people who feel like this. And the biggest thing I've learned is this. We are told through our parents, education, our media, and so much more, that we live in a black and white world, where the game is to get good at one thing, fit into one identity. Like, what one thing will you be when you grow up? We've all heard that one, right? Like, probably more than once. But the thing is that so many of us just aren't that sort of person at heart. And so that advice leaves us feeling stuck. But what if the mistake isn't in how you are, but in how you were told you should be? One of my favorite authors, Graham Greene, said, "Human nature is not black and white, but black and grey." Guys, this is how we are as humans. This is how we actually are as humans. And I mean, realizing that is a game changer, because it means you haven't been getting it wrong. You know, that pull inside that was saying, God, there has to be another way other than to just squish myself into this sort of one-dimensional or like one-track version of me. It's not wrong. We're simply not given a model for the world that lets that way of being thrive. And just to be clear, not only is this way of being like a thing, there's actually a word for it. And that word is liminal. And this, by the way, is my favorite word. It describes a state of in-betweenness, like you're not quite one thing, but you're not quite another. You're on the borderlands. You're a part of this, but also a part of that, of becoming. And when I first heard this word, I just thought, wow, that describes me. And not just the big life stuff, but things like, say, I mean, right now on my bookshelf, the Sex and the City novel is cuddling up to a behavioral economics textbook. And I love both of them equally, right? Like, there's actually a word for that. You know, a great example of liminality would be vampires. I mean, they're not quite alive, but they're not quite dead. They're not quite human, but not quite other. They're not fully evil, but they're not all good. It's like they're in between worlds, like they don't fit into anyone's space. But why would I mention that here? Well, because it's no mistake that over the past few decades, vampires and zombies, well, they've been the topic of some of the cult TV shows with like the biggest and most dedicated fan bases. You see, we watch what we desire to be, but aren't allowed to be. And the one thing our society does not allow us to be is liminal. And in a world full of black and white messages, like, are you in or out? Are you with us or against us? Are you this or that? Then this has such a big pull. And now I've said it, heads up, you're just going to see it everywhere. I mean, so many popular dramas do the same. Like Breaking Bad, right? It's a massive hit, and it revolves around this question: is the main character a family man, or something else, or both? Like, that show is literally about liminality. You see, I say this because we watch this stuff, like whenever we turn on our TVs, or for we nomads, whenever we load up our Netflix, or our definitely not illegal VPN connections. Like, we watch this stuff whenever we turn on our screens. But then we go back to real life and then we squish ourselves down. Okay? Be one thing. Fit in your box. And we see this all the time in the corporate world, right? This sense that you have to put on a certain version of you to go to the office and have the suit and walk in to get the paycheck and leave everything else. And so many of us have decided to move on from that world or never joined it in the first place. But the funny thing is, even when we've made that bid for freedom and we're creating something on our terms, even then, that little voice can come up, can't it? The one that says, don't mess this up. You found your tribe. You're at the conference with them. So don't mess this one up. Don't be the outsider here. And so once again, we tell ourselves, hide down your edges. Be one thing. Fit in that box. In so many different ways, millions of us are doing this. But it doesn't have to be that way. See, here's a different model. I'm going to draw this because live drawing is fun. So the way the world works, the way we're told the world works anyway, it's kind of like a bunch of continents. So if this were like careers or business, it could be here is continent lawyer, here's continent entrepreneur, here's continent, vegan raw brownie baker, here's continent blogger. And anyway, your role, we're told, is to find the continent where you really fit, to get the visa, to learn the customs, rise the ranks by being the one who fits best. But that's a losing game if you're liminal, because you don't quite feel like you fit. And so your only option, other than to pretend, is to look for a continent where you fit better. But even though that new world can seem really exciting at first, soon you get disappointed, right? Like, secretly, it wasn't quite as you thought. Like, you'll have to leave another bit of yourself at the door, and so the cycle continues. But what's the alternative? Well, simply it's to create your own island. An island where every bit of you fits. And you create this island just off the shore of your favorite continent. Looks pretty there. And it takes the best of that world and fills out like the rest of it with the best of the other worlds that you have a foot in. So these could be aspects of like your personality, your background, or of like something that you can't help being. It's probably easy for us to give you an example here. So let's just say that you had an island where you did business and life strategy, like for people who run their own thing. Now, the continent approach would be to look for someone else who did that, right? And tell yourself, God, I should be more like them. Maybe like late night Facebook stalk them, like, or something. Not that we've ever done that. But in this one, you get to create your own version. So your island could be, say, populated by the fact that you're a highly sensitive person in a field that's traditionally more brash. It could have some of the storytelling you can't help doing. Add in a sprinkle of your travel lust, a light dusting of being a straight talker, and so on. And by the way, that's part of a description of one of my islands. And I couldn't have found that job description or that business description anywhere, right? I mean, I did look. And that's kind of the point. You see, you don't find your place as a liminal person. You create it. As I said that, I was just thinking, this could sound like, hold up, isn't this just a compromise, Marianne? Isn't this basically like a workaround to deal with your weirdness? Wouldn't it be better just to not be like this in the first place? Well, when you take the things that it means to be liminal, like having a foot in more than one place and bridging worlds, having maybe a slightly different personality to other people around you, not focusing on one idea like forever and ever and like excluding anything else. If you take these things and apply them to yourself, we can kind of feel shame, right? Like we're getting it wrong, or being weird, not doing the grown-up thing right. But here's the thing. If you take those same traits and you apply them to others, you know who that describes? It describes leaders. It describes change makers, innovators, creators. It describes like the very people we're telling our children to aspire to be, and they get there through the traits that we tell ourselves to squish down and hide. I mean, take successful innovators, right? Innovators and innovation doesn't happen by some guy sitting in a silent white room, just like waiting for inspiration to strike. As the bloggers and writers among us know, that is exactly how writer's block happens. But innovation happens so often from an idea being taken from one world and used in another. Like a tiny camera with like a really tiny plastic lens. That didn't sell to camera buyers. But when you put it on the back of a mobile phone, bingo. I mean, similarly, people who create movements, people like, say, Seth Godin, who was seen at the forefront of their field, they didn't get there by being like everyone else in their continent. They created their own island off the coast of that space. See, movements are created by liminal people. So, your liminal edge could be something about maybe your background, or maybe just a personality trait that you could choose to hide away because it's like too different, but instead you decide to step into it. Like this one guy, Ricky, who organized conferences where these world-leading specialists gave these big, insightful speeches. But Ricky, well, he had a personality quirk that was a little bit different to others around him. Impatience. He was a conference organizer that got super bored by long speeches. And so he just started giving speakers like shorter and shorter time slots, shorter than anything on the scene at the time. And the little-known TED conference started to take off. That's why TED Talks are one of the biggest platforms in the world today, and why they've touched almost everyone in this room today. You see, being liminal, it's not about being some sort of rebel who's being all different for the sake of it. Being liminal, it's like being an inside outsider, with one foot in the world you want to move in and another foot elsewhere. And you get to decide where those borders lie. And that was an example of someone who had a personality difference, right? A little personality quirk that so many of us here would have just gone, oh, I can't, actually show that. I have to pretend to be like every other non-impatient person around me. But what if your liminal difference is more about, say, your background being a little bit different to others in your field, or maybe you just have different attitudes or values? Well, there was this guy called Scott who found himself in that position a few years ago. And Scott was a nightclub promoter who lived in New York, and which is where all great stories start, by the way. And you know it's going to be good when there's a nightclub promoter from New York. But actually, Scott didn't feel that way anymore. He'd been doing that for years, and he started to have this strange thought that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than living a hedonistic life in Manhattan. Crazy thought. And so he went off to West Africa to volunteer for charity for a year. And what he saw there touched him so much, the poverty that he saw, like the real life that he was finally touching, really started to change him. And he stayed another year. And at the end of the second year, he turned to the people who had been running the charity, and he said to them, I really want to make a difference here. What's the one thing that would make the biggest difference to the poverty, the deprivation, all the issues that I'm seeing here in West Africa? And they thought about it and they said, water. Access to clean drinking water in the most remote villages in the world. That's what we need. That's what's going to make the biggest difference. By the way, there are millions of people in those villages, so good luck with that. And so, at this point, let's be real, there are kind of two choices that most of us would make. One of them is to say, I'm a nightclub promoter from New York, I probably can't take on an issue that the UN has had issues solving. Maybe I should give up on that. And the other one is to say, I am so passionate about this that I'm going to completely reject my old life. I'm going to become an aid worker and move to Africa and seek to fit in with that world as much as possible, take on the language and the image and just reject everything about my past. And Scott didn't make that choice. He made a different one. He went back to New York and he told himself, well, I don't know how to run a charity, even though I've now met people who do, but I know how to throw a party. And so that's where he started. His birthday was coming up, so he threw a party for himself and charged admission. And that was the first time that he started fundraising for his charity. And then he started running these fundraising events around the city. And a funny thing started to happen. Because he didn't live in the sort of third sector, in the NGO world, he wasn't moving in that space full time, he had a foot in the world of cynical New Yorkers who would say things like, yeah, you're a great guy, but I don't like charities. I don't know what they do with my money. And so they didn't want to give. But because he had a foot in that world, he listened and he responded. So he made little innovations, like whenever you donated to his charity, you'd get a photo of the well that your money had built and a GPS location so you could actually go and check on it. And people would be like, this is super cool. And they'd share it with their friends. He realized that people didn't just give out of the goodness of their heart every day of the year, they do it for different events. So he made it easy for people to donate their birthdays and have all their friends give money for their birthday. And as a result, Scott Harrison's charity Water, which many of you will have heard of, has provided clean drinking water to 7 million people and counting. For a moment for that. 7 million people, right? And the reason I share that here is that wouldn't have happened had Scott decided to hide this big part of who he was, who was a super connected social guy who knew a particular world that would have been very, very easy to reject. He was someone who had a certain personality that he could have said was inappropriate for the sort of impact that he wanted to make. But by not doing that, by keeping a foot in that world, but also getting solid advice from people who knew what they were doing on the ground, 7 million people and counting have access to stuff that's saving their life. And I say that here because I know that when we hear a topic like the hidden power of not quite fitting in, it can kind of feel a bit optional, right? Like, that's the thing you do later, like when you sort out the important stuff. But I got really obsessed with this topic a few years ago. I got really interested in this topic and I started having a look at whether these stories were edge cases or whether they were more common. And not to spoiler the book that I'm currently exploring about this, but basically it is really difficult to find a success story of someone who's risen to the top of their field where there wasn't a point where they stepped into their liminal difference. It's hard to find that example, and as far as I can see, it doesn't really exist. Whether it's a background difference like Scott, or a personality difference like someone who was way more structured and introverted, moving in a field full of bold extroverts who end up innovating in one direction, or someone like Marie Forleo, who many of you know in online business, who started out in that space at a time when the online business space was not sexy, was not cool, where it was full of sleazy guys doing yellow highlighter pen pages all over the internet. She came in as the Jersey girl who taught dancing and fitness for years and revolutionized how that worked just by actually bringing that part of her to the picture. Not by throwing the whole thing out, but by bringing that part in. And that's what we do as liminals. That's our gift. But so often we see it as our curse, don't we? We see that difference as our curse. And yet it doesn't have to be. From introverts to extroverts, and every shade of grey you can imagine in between, this applies. It's always those pieces that we're so tempted to hide in the shadows that turn out to be our edge when we bring them into the light. Actually, I just want to pause here a sec and say, at this point you might be thinking, this is inspiring stuff, hopefully. I'm totally going to share it with my readers or my friends or my social media followers or whatever, but realistically, maybe you already are a leader, or maybe you're just somewhere you've worked really hard for, right? And there can be this little sense that maybe this is for someone younger or someone newer in their field without so much to lose. Like the sense, not me, not now. And I get this, by the way. I really get this because that's how I felt a few years ago. See, everything had come together with my business. Finally, after lots of hard work, I had a business doing stuff I loved, with great people. I was traveling the world, running online courses that were selling out, and it was all great. And then one day, to my publisher's amazement and surprise, I found myself the author of a UK best-selling book related to this. And suddenly, everything exploded. Those opportunities and ideas that I'd been circling around and looking at for years were just pinging up in my inbox. It was like that little island I created was suddenly popular, right? That little weird space was cool now, and everyone wanted to come and visit. And so I did just what you'd expect at that point, when my star was at its highest. And I had a breakdown. I disappeared from the scene, very quietly, and I started turning down everything from, keynote talks to interviews to, I didn't create anything new in that time either. I literally just couldn't do it. But the weird thing was, at that exact same time, in the UK, the national press was seeing me as this expert in location independence and online business. I was kind of like the pin-up person for Digital Nomads at the time. And every time I'd get a call from a journalist, I would just think, why are they talking to me? Of course I had the business that let me travel the world, live in beautiful places, etc. But I genuinely didn't feel like the sort of person that the magazines were writing about. For starters, I guess there was a bit of a sense then that digital nomads were supposed to be these frugal travelers, without a home. And we'd live out of our perfectly packed backpacks with 2 t-shirts a year, right? And have you guys ever seen those packing videos online where people show how to do the perfectly packed suit? Who here has made one of those videos? Just out of curiosity. Anyone? No one. Well, full respect for anyone who does, because guess what? I'm terrible at packing. I tried to make one once, I'm not joking, it descended into a comedy farce, because, let's just be nice and say it's not a key strength, right? And, my hobby is interior design. Sit with that for a sec. I literally could not stop buying cushions. And I felt like my messy liminal self was, it was being squished. And I just thought, I don't even want to be that person they think I am. Now, just want to be clear, if that had happened a few years earlier, like it wouldn't have exactly been a major problem, right? Like I just would have switched a few things up, stepped into my differences without a second thought. It wouldn't actually have bothered me. But the thing was, not now. You see, in my mind, it was fine. It was even desirable to be like this messy and liminal when you were the scrappy upstart. But there was still that 16-year-old girl who believed her teacher, who believed that proper success meant fitting into one place properly and staying there. Yeah, don't rock the boat. Others would kill for that opportunity. Play the part. But, I mean, I obviously couldn't keep talking about this stuff while feeling that way, so I took time out, thank you passive income, I took time out and went on a journey to kind of figure this out. And it finally clicked one day. The people that I most admired, like genuinely admired, the people at the top of their game, I'm talking like real household names here, they didn't do things the way I was telling myself like I had to do them now. They didn't let success on their island turn it into a trap that defined like who they could be or the one way to do things. Instead, they turned their island into a boat and like they moved it along with them. Take Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love. Yeah, it's a major bestseller. It's about a part of her life. Now, I mean, that book was made into a movie starring Julia Roberts, and I'm pretty sure that when you get your life made into a movie starring Julia Roberts, you can kind of run off that one story forever, right? That she could have. She could have gone on, like, the speaker circuit, talking about that one story on a loop. But instead, she holed up in a small town and wrote a novel about 19th century plant collectors. And then she went on the TED stage, talked about creativity, wrote a book about that. But you know the funny thing? Eat, Pray, Love, which is how most people first heard of Liz Gilbert, that wasn't even her first success. For starters, the 1990s movie Coyote Ugly, that was based on a story she wrote about her experiences working in a bar. Now, imagine if she'd stopped there. If she said, oh, well, writers like me, we can only take these steps from here. I might feel too different, but gosh, no, I'm too far along. Hide all that away. I mean, no. Instead, it was all about stepping into her differences. And as a result, she's happier, I assume, but she's certainly made more impact than had she stopped and said, that was it. You got one go. Now stay still. Of course, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, by the way. There are certainly much more subtle evolutions out there. But the point is, this theme was consistent among anyone I admired who was world-class in what they did. You see, up until then, I thought that embracing your differences or your liminal edge was kind of like a tool. There's this nifty marketing approach you'd use to stand out or get an edge when you were young or when you were new. I thought it was a tool, but what I didn't realize is it's who we are. And right now is the time for you as a liminal person. I mean, right now the world is changing so fast that there's no way to predict what specialism or skill will be in demand, except for one thing: the ability to navigate change, to straddle borders, to bring in different perspectives, to be, in a word, liminal. And that's what you have already. And what's more, the world needs you. At a time when the world is putting up its borders, trying to divide people into this or that, we need people like you who can straddle those borders, bring in fresh perspectives. That we need you now more than ever. And so, if you like these ideas, the one thing you can do is live them. Because it's hard to inspire other generations and do so authentically when secretly we feel there's no option than to be stuck for ourselves. I mean, imagine if my teacher, back when I was 16, had known what we talked about here today. Here's what he might have said. Marianne, you and I have something in common. We're both liminal. And the world won't always understand that. But I want you to know it's a valuable way to be. And don't just take my word for it. The examples and islands are all around when you know how to look. So don't hide that away. Because you won't succeed despite your liminality, but because of it. So I say the same to you. If you've nodded and thought, that's me, like even once here, then know that you're not alone. You're in good company, along with the innovators, or even those with a quirk, who in the past would have hidden their true colours, but who know their time is now. Because you belong here, as does every part of you. So thank you.